"Name your price," his rival said. The Korean Mafia boss shocked all by choosing the maid. Zora was invisible, just a maid enduring cruelty in Sterling's household, until one ruthless negotiation changed everything. When Mafia boss Jun-ho Park is given the right to claim anything to end a feud, he shocks the room by choosing her. What begins as a cold transaction becomes a dangerous act of protection. But when Bianca and Derek cross a line, refusing to let go of the girl they once owned, Jun-ho Park proves that touching what's his comes at a devastating price. Welcome back, my amazing viewers. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching from. Now back to the story. Zora kept her eyes downcast as she refilled wine glasses, her hands steady despite the ache in her ribs from where one of Sterling's guards had shoved her into a doorframe that morning. Pain had become a familiar companion during her years in this household, as constant as the contempt that followed her through these halls. Derek sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his fingers drumming an irritated rhythm against the armrest of his chair. Across from him sat Jun-ho Park, composed and unervingly calm, his dark eyes revealing nothing. The tension between the two men was palpable, a living thing that had been growing for months, fed by business disputes and personal slights that had escalated into something that threatened to consume them both. Today's meeting was supposed to end it. This feud had cost both men time, money, and reputation. Zora moved along the perimeter of the room like a shadow, trying to be invisible. She had learned that invisibility was survival in Sterling's house. But invisibility was a luxury rarely afforded to her, especially when Bianca, Sterling's sister, was present. More wine. Bianca snapped, not bothering to look at Zora as she thrust her glass forward. Bianca was draped across her chair with calculated elegance. Her designer dress is probably worth more than Zora would earn in a year if Sterling ever actually paid her what he owed. Bianca's eyes, however, were fixed entirely on Jun-ho Park, her lips curved in a smile that was all predatory interest. Zora approached and reached for the glass. As she poured, her hand trembled slightly, just barely, but enough. A single drop of wine splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth. "You clumsy little wretch." Bianca's voice cut through the room like a whip. She turned to Jun-ho Park with an exaggerated expression of dismay. "You see what my brother has to tolerate? Completely incompetent. I keep telling Derek he should just throw her out on the street where she belongs." Heat flooded Zora's cheeks, but she kept her eyes down, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Sterling laughed, a cruel bark of amusement, while his guards smirked from their positions along the wall. This was entertainment to them, her humiliation, a brief diversion from the tedium of their day. "My apologies," Zora whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Oh, she speaks," Bianca exclaimed mockingly. She leaned toward Jun-ho Park, placing her hand on his arm with deliberate intimacy. "You know, some people simply aren't meant for better things. They're born for scrubbing and servitude." Her fingers traced a pattern on Jun-ho Park's sleeve as she gazed up at him through her lashes. "Unlike us, wouldn't you agree? We understand quality, refinement, and what it means to be exceptional." Jun-ho Park's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in the depths of his eyes. He gently removed his arm from Bianca's grasp and leaned back in his chair. "Shall we conclude our business?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that made Dirk straighten slightly. Sterling waved his hand dismissively. "Yes, yes. Let's end this tedious affair. You wanted to negotiate, so negotiate. What will it take for you to back off and let me conduct my business without your interference?" Jun-ho Park was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving slowly around the room. It passed over Sterling's smug expression, over Bianca's eager face, over the guards standing at attention, and finally it landed on Zora. She felt the weight of that look and felt seen in a way that was both terrifying and strangely compelling. His eyes held hers for a heartbeat. 2, 3. You said I could choose anything to end this feud, Junho Park said slowly, still looking at Zora. Anything at all. Within reason, Sterling said impatiently. Money, property, and business concessions. Name your price. Junho Park turned back to Derek, and when he spoke, his voice was clear. I choose her, he gestured toward Zora, the maid. I want her. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum of sound that seemed to suck the air from the room. Then Derek began to laugh, a genuine belly laugh of disbelief. The guards joined in, their gofas echoing off the walls. Bianca's face contorted with confusion and then indignation. The maid. Derek gasped between laughs. You're joking. You must be joking. This is absurd. Bianca shrieked, her composure shattering. You want that pathetic little servant over me? Over an actual partnership with this family. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. She's nothing. She's worthless. She's enough. Junho Park's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. He stood slowly, and the laughter died in throats, choked off by something dangerous in his tone. I don't recall asking for commentary. Derek, you gave your word, anything I wanted. Do you intend to go back on that word in front of witnesses? The amusement drained from Sterling's face, replaced by calculation. Are you serious, completely? Sterling shrugged, his indifference more cutting than any insult. Fine, take her. Good riddance, honestly. One less mouth to feed. He waved his hand as if brushing away an insect. She's yours. We're done here. Bianca's face had gone blotchy with rage. You can't be serious, Derek. You're just going to let him. She's not worth it. This is humiliating. The only thing humiliating here, Junho Park said softly, but with an edge of steel that made Bianca step back, is how you've all treated her. We're leaving. He crossed the room to where Zora stood frozen, still clutching the wine bottle like a lifeline. Come with me, he said, and this time his voice was gentle, almost kind. Now. Zora's mind reeled. Nothing made sense. This had to be some elaborate joke, another form of torture. But Junho Park's hand was extended toward her, and his eyes held something she hadn't seen directed at her in so long she'd almost forgotten what it looked like. Respect. Her legs moved before her mind fully decided, carrying her toward him. She set down the wine bottle with shaking hands and followed Junho Park from the room, walking past Bianca's furious face, past Sterling's dismissive sneer, and past the guards who looked on with confusion. The night air hit her face as they exited the estate, cold and sharp and real. A sleek black car waited in the circular driveway. Junho Park opened the passenger door, waited for her to get in, then closed it carefully before moving around to the driver's side. The leather seats were soft, impossibly soft, and smelled of expensive cologne and something else, something like safety. Though Zora didn't trust the feeling. As Junho Park pulled away from the estate, the building growing smaller in the side mirror, Zora found her voice. It came out smaller than she wanted but defiant despite her fear. Why? She asked, turning to look at his profile illuminated by the dashboard lights. Why did you choose me? Junho Park's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles going white. The muscle in his jaw worked. And when Zora looked closer, she could see the barely controlled anger still simmering beneath his composed exterior. He didn't answer, didn't even look at her, and just kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead as they drove into the night. The mansion materialized from the darkness like something out of a dream, all clean lines and warm lights spilling from tall windows. Zora pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the car window, watching as they passed through wrought iron gates that opened silently at their approach. The grounds were immaculate, even in the dim evening light. Manicured gardens flanked a circular driveway where a fountain stood silent, its water stilled for the night. Junho Park parked in front of the guard to open her door. Zora stepped out onto smooth stone pavers, her worn shoes looking shabby against their perfection. She clutched her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how threadbare her maid's uniform had become, how the hem was coming loose on one side, and how there was a stain on the sleeve she'd never quite managed to scrub out. "This way," Junho Park said, his voice still carrying that careful neutrality from the car. He led her up wide steps to double doors that opened into an entrance hall that made her breath catch. Where Derek's estate had been all cold marble and harsh angles, this space breathed warmth. Rich hardwood floors glowed under soft lighting, and the walls were painted in colors that reminded her of sunset. Cream, gold, and the palest amber. An older woman appeared from a side corridor, her gray hair pulled into a neat bun, her expression kind but curious. "Mr. Junho Park. Welcome home. Mrs. Han, this is Zora. She'll be working here as my personal maid. Could you show her to the east bedroom and make sure she has everything she needs?" The older woman's eyebrows rose fractionally, but she nodded. "Of course, sir. This way, dear." Zora glanced back at Junho Park, but he had already turned away, disappearing down another corridor without a backward look. She followed Mrs. Han up a sweeping staircase, her fingers trailing along the smooth banister, still trying to convince herself this was real. "Here we are," Mrs. Kong said, opening a door on the second floor. "Your room." Zora stepped inside and stopped. The space was larger than any room she'd ever occupied, painted in soft lavender with white trim. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, dressed in linens that looked cloud-soft, and there was an actual sitting area with an armchair positioned near a window that overlooked the gardens. Through another door, she glimpsed white tile and gleaming fixtures. A bathroom of her own. "This can't be right," Zora whispered. "Servants don't stay in rooms like this." Mrs. Han's expression softened. Mr. Junho Park was very clear about the arrangements. "This is your room. The closet has some clothes that should fit you until we can get you properly outfitted. Bathrooms are through there, with fresh towels in the cabinet. Is there anything else you need?" Zora shook her head mutely, and Mrs. Han withdrew with a gentle smile, closing the door behind her. Alone, Zora moved deeper into the room, touching things hesitantly as if they might disappear. The bed was real, the mattress yielding when she pressed her hand against it. The window opened at her touch, letting in night air that smelled of jasmine and fresh earth instead of the stale recycled air of the servants' quarters at Derek's estate. She found the clothes Mrs. Han had mentioned to be simple but well-made pieces in her size, including a proper maid's uniform that wasn't threadbare or stained. In the bathroom, she spent long minutes under a shower that had perfect water pressure and unlimited hot water, washing away months of grime and exhaustion and fear until the water finally ran cold, and she emerged feeling almost human again. But sleep wouldn't come. Zora lay in that impossibly soft bed, staring at the ceiling as moonlight painted shadows across it. Her body was exhausted, bone-deep tired, but her mind raced in endless circles. Why had Junho Park chosen her? What did he want from her? The fear she'd kept at bay through the shock of the evening came flooding back. Men didn't claim women the way he'd claimed her, without expecting something in return. She'd escaped one hell. But what if she'd only traded it for another prettier one? She watched the moon arc across her window, counting the hours until pale gray light crept across the sky, and she heard the house beginning to stir below. Giving up on sleep, she dressed in the new uniform, braided her hair with practiced efficiency, and ventured downstairs. Mrs. Kong found her in the kitchen, looking lost. "Couldn't sleep?" the older woman asked knowingly. "First nights in a new place are always hard. Come on, let's get you some breakfast, and I'll go over your duties." The duties were shockingly mundane. Zora would maintain Junho Park's personal spaces, his bedroom and private study, ensure his schedule ran smoothly, and handle his laundry, cleaning, and meals. There was no mention of anything else. No coded language about special services. No knowing looks. Mrs. Hahn treated it all as perfectly ordinary, as if beautiful young women were acquired in business negotiations every day and put to work as simple housemaids. By mid-morning, Zora was dusting Junho Park's study, a magnificent room lined with books and dominated by a massive desk positioned before floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd seen Junho Park only once in passing, and he'd merely nodded at her before continuing his phone conversation. Still distant, although warm toward her, not as cold as the night they arrived, as if the passion he'd shown when defending her had been a momentary aberration. The days began to develop a rhythm. Junho Park was everywhere and nowhere, a constant presence that somehow maintained perfect distance. He never touched her, never made inappropriate demands, and never looked at her the way Derek had. Yet he seemed always aware of her, appearing whenever she needed something, solving problems before she could voice them. On her 5th day, disaster struck. Zora was cleaning Junho Park's bedroom when her sleeve caught the edge of a vase on his dresser. A beautiful piece of deep blue porcelain with gold accents. She watched in horror as it toppled as she lunged for it and missed as it shattered against the hardwood floor in an explosion of ceramic shards. Her hands shook as she knelt to gather the pieces, her mind already calculating the cost. Months of wages, maybe years. Sterling would have beaten her for this. Would have docked her pay until she was working for nothing. The fear was so familiar, it felt like an old coat settling around her shoulders with comfortable weight. What happened? Junho Park's voice came from the doorway. Zora kept her head down, her fingers bleeding where sharp edges had cut her. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It was an accident. I'll pay for it. I'll work however long it takes. Please, just Zora." He crossed the room and knelt beside her, his hands carefully taking her bleeding fingers. "Stop. Look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes, expecting anger, disappointment, and calculation of her debt. Instead, she saw only concern. "It's a vase," he said quietly. "Objects break. Accidents happen." He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wrapped it around her bleeding hand. "Mrs. Hahn keeps a first aid kit in the kitchen. Go clean these cuts properly. I'll handle this. But it must have been expensive. I don't care about the vase." Something in his voice made her believe him. "I care that you're hurt. Go." Zora went, her mind reeling once again. That night, she lay in her beautiful room and tried to understand the man who had claimed her like a possession yet treated her with more respect than anyone in her entire life. She didn't understand him, but slowly, treacherously, she was beginning to trust him, and that terrified her most of all. The doorbell rang with an aggressive insistence that made Mrs. Hahn frown as she answered it. Zora was polishing silver in the dining room when she heard the familiar grating voice that made her stomach drop. "Where is he? I need to see Junho Park immediately." Bianca swept into the entrance hall like a storm system, all sharp perfume and sharper edges. She wore a dress that was more suggestion than garment, red silk that clung to every curve and plunged dangerously low. Her heels clicked against the hardwood with staccato precision as her eyes scanned the space with predatory intent. "Miss Bianca," Mrs. Hahn said with professional coolness, "Mr. Junho Park is in a meeting. If you'd like to make an appointment, I'll wait." Bianca's gaze landed on Zora, who had frozen in the doorway with a silver candlestick still in her hands. A slow, cruel smile spread across Bianca's painted lips. "Oh, how perfect. The little servant girl can keep me company." "You," she pointed a manicured finger at Zora. "Take me to Junho Park's study now." Mrs. Hahn's expression showed clear disapproval, but she nodded to Zora. "Show Miss Bianca to the sitting room. I'll inform Mr. Junho Park of her arrival." The walk down the hallway felt endless. Bianca followed close behind. Close enough that Zora could feel the heat of her presence and could smell that overwhelming perfume that probably cost more than furniture. When they were out of Mrs. Hahn's earshot, Bianca leaned in, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Enjoying your little fantasy, are you?" Her breath was hot against Zora's ear, playing house in his mansion, pretending you're anything more than a novelty that will wear off. You're just his newest toy, sweetheart. And toys get broken when he's done playing with them. Zora's jaw clenched, but she kept walking, kept her spine straight. She'd survived worse than Bianca's poison. "He'll get bored," Bianca continued, her heels clicking faster to keep pace. "Men like Junho Park always do, and when he does, where will you go? Back to the streets? At least with Derek, you knew your place. Here, you're just deluding yourself into thinking you matter." They reached the sitting room, and Zora gestured inside with a trembling hand. "Please wait here." Bianca's hand shot out, gripping Zora's wrist hard enough to bruise. "Listen to me carefully, you little nothing. I'm going to make Junho Park an offer today. And when he accepts it, and he will, you'll be right back where you belong. On your knees, scrubbing floors, being reminded every day that you are worthless. Derek was right to treat you the way he did. You're not meant for anything better. Let go of her." Junho Park's voice cut through the air like a blade. He stood in the doorway, still in his business attire. His tie loosened, and his expression was terrible in its controlled fury. Bianca released Zora immediately, her face transforming into a sneering smile. "Junho Park, finally, I've been waiting. What are you doing in my home, Bianca?" The coldness in his tone would have frozen fire. Bianca's smile faltered but held. "I came to make you a business proposition. One I think you'll find quite attractive." Junho Park's eyes flicked to Zora, taking in her pale face and the red mark on her wrist where Bianca had gripped her. Something dangerous flickered in his expression. "Zora, you're dismissed." "Thank you." Zora fled gratefully, but she didn't go far. She found herself in the hallway just around the corner, close enough to hear their voices. Unable to make herself leave, she told herself she needed to know what Bianca was planning. But the truth was, she needed to know what Junho Park would say. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries," Bianca said, her voice taking on a businesslike quality. "I know you've been wanting the waterfront territory that Sterling controls. It's prime development land worth millions. I can get it for you." "In exchange for what?" "Give her back." Bianca's voice hardened. "Return the maid to Sterling's household where she belongs, and the territory is yours. It's a simple transaction, Junho Park. Property for property. You have to admit it's a much better deal than whatever momentary satisfaction you're getting from your little act of charity." The silence that followed was so long that Zora's heart began to pound. She pressed her back against the wall, her hands fisted in her uniform. Of course, he would take the deal. Men like Junho Park didn't refuse profitable business arrangements for the sake of a maid. Why would he? The territory Bianca was offering was worth infinitely more than she could ever be. No. The word was flat, final, and absolute. "What?" Bianca's voice pitched higher with disbelief. "Junho Park, be reasonable. You can't possibly say I said no." Junho Park's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath. "And let me make something clear, Bianca, so there's no misunderstanding. Zora is not a bargaining chip. She is not a piece of property to be traded or returned. She is under my protection, and she will remain under my protection for as long as she chooses to stay here. This is insane. She's just a servant, a nobody." "She is mine to protect," Junho Park interrupted, and his voice carried a weight that made Zora's breath catch. "And I don't give up what's mine. Not for territory, not for money, not for anything. Now get out of my house. You're making a mistake. The only mistake was yours for coming here and thinking I would ever consider your proposition. Leave now before I have security escort you out." Zora heard the sharp click of Bianca's heels storming away. Heard Mrs. Hahn's calm voice directing her to the exit. Heard the door slam with enough force to rattle the windows. She stood frozen in the hallway, her mind racing, her heart doing complicated things in her chest that she didn't want to examine too closely. She didn't see Junho Park approach until he was standing in front of her, his expression unreadable. "I know you were listening." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize." He studied her face for a long moment. "Your wrist." Let me see." She held out her arm, and he examined the angry red marks Bianca's fingers had left, his jaw tightening. "I'll have Mrs. Kong bring ice." "It's fine. I've had worse." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and his eyes darkened. "That needs to stop being your measure of acceptable treatment." They stood there in the hallway, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, and Zora felt something crack open inside her chest. All the questions she'd been holding back, all the confusion and fear and desperate need to understand, came flooding out. "Why?" Her voice broke on the word. "Why did you really choose me? Why won't you trade me for something valuable? Why do you protect me when you barely speak to me? I need to understand." Junho Park was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he gestured to his study. "Come with me." She followed him into that book-lined sanctuary, and he moved to the windows, his back to her, his hands in his pockets. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, lower, and more vulnerable than she'd ever heard it. "I'd been watching Sterling's operation for months, doing surveillance, gathering information, and looking for leverage. And I kept seeing you." He turned to face her. "The way you held yourself even when they were cruel. The way you never completely broke, never let them destroy whatever it was inside you that kept you standing. I watched you endure things that would have shattered most people, and you just endured." Zora wrapped her arms around herself. "You felt sorry for me." No, the word was fierce. "That's not it at all. Pity is passive, Zora. Pity looks away. What I felt was rage at the injustice of it. You had dignity and strength and grace, and they treated you like nothing. They were blind to what was right in front of them. I'm just a maid. You're so much more than that." He took a step closer. "When Bianca stood there humiliating you when they all laughed, I realized I had a chance to do something that wasn't about business or strategy or winning. I could choose justice. I could choose to recognize your worth when everyone else saw nothing. But I don't understand what you want from me." "I want you to be safe," Junho Park said simply. "I want you to sleep without fear. I want you to heal from what they did to you. I want you to remember that you're a person who deserves respect and kindness. That's all. That's everything." Zora felt tears prick her eyes. "You don't even know me. Then let me learn." Something shifted in his expression. Vulnerability breaking through that careful control if you're willing. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility, and the weight of truths finally spoken. Zora looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the cold exterior to the man underneath, a man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had chosen justice over profit, and who protected without asking for anything in return. "I'm willing," she whispered. And in that moment something fundamental changed between them. Two broken people seeing each other clearly for the first time, beginning to understand that healing might be possible, that worth could be recognized, and that protection could transform into something deeper if they were brave enough to let it. The change began with small things. A week after their conversation in the study, Junho Park appeared in the library where Zora was dusting and simply asked, "Do you like to read?" She'd frozen, cloth in hand, uncertain if this was a test. "I used to before." Before what? Before, I didn't have time anymore. Before, reading felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. She traced the spine of a leather-bound volume. Before I forgot, there was more to life than surviving it. Junho Park pulled the book from the shelf and handed it to her. "Take it. Read it. That's not a request from an employer, Zora. It's a suggestion from someone who thinks you might enjoy it." She did enjoy it. That night, curled in her armchair, as rain pattered against the windows, she devoured the first 3 chapters of a novel she'd heard about but never imagined she'd hold in her hands. It became their ritual. Mornings over coffee, Zora, no longer standing at attention, but sitting, talking, debating the merits of fictional characters and plot twists. Junho Park's reserved exterior began to crack, revealing a man with strong opinions about literature. A dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and a smile that transformed his entire face when she managed to coax it out. "You're different from what I expected," she told him one morning, 3 weeks into their new dynamic. "How so?" "Warmer, funnier, more." She searched for the word human. "I could say the same about you." His eyes held hers over the rim of his cup. "You're not the terrified girl who asked me why in the car anymore." "I'm still terrified," she admitted, "just less frequently." "Of me?" "No." The truth of it surprised her. "Not of you. Of this ending. Of waking up and discovering it was all temporary." Junho Park set down his cup carefully. "What if I told you it doesn't have to be?" The conversation shifted, then deepened. He told her about his childhood, raised by a father who valued success over everything and who taught him that emotions were weakness and vulnerability was failure. He explained how he'd built walls so high that he'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. How the business world had only reinforced those lessons until he became the cold, distant man everyone expected him to be. "Until you," he said quietly. "You made me remember that walls keep things out, but they also keep you trapped inside them." Zora shared her own story in fragments over the following weeks. The parent she'd lost young, the aunt who'd taken her in only to exploit her labor, the string of households where she'd learned that kindness was rare and cruelty was casual. She told him about the dreams she'd abandoned and the art she used to love creating. Before exhaustion stole her passion, the person she'd been before the world had tried to grind her down to nothing. "Show me," Junho Park said when she mentioned her art. "I haven't drawn in years. I wouldn't even know where to start." The next day, a full set of professional art supplies appeared in her room with a note in Junho Park's precise handwriting. "Start anywhere. Start now." She cried when she saw them, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that someone believed she was worth investing in. That night, she made her first tentative sketches, her hand remembering what her mind had tried to forget. Junho Park's study became their sanctuary. Evenings found them there. Zora curled in the leather chair by the window with her sketchpad while Junho Park worked at his desk, the comfortable silence between them speaking volumes. Sometimes he'd look up and find her watching him, and instead of the fear that might have been there weeks ago, he saw curiosity, warmth, and something that made his carefully controlled heart beat faster. "What are you drawing?" he asked one night. She hesitated, then turned the pad around. It was him, captured in charcoal, his expression thoughtful as he read, the evening light catching the angles of his face. But she'd drawn something more than his features. She'd somehow captured the loneliness he carried, the vulnerability he tried to hide. The man beneath the armor. "Is this how you see me?" His voice was rough. "Yes." She met his gaze. "Is it wrong?" "No." He stood and crossed to her, studying the drawing more closely. "It's the most seen I've felt in my entire life." There would be hands brushed as he handed back the sketchpad, and neither pulled away. The touch lingered, transformed from accidental to intentional, fingers intertwining in a moment that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "Zora," he said softly, "I need you to know this thing between us. It's not about gratitude or obligation. You understand that, don't you? Then what is it about?" "Recognition." He lifted his free hand to her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "I see you. Not the maid, not the victim, not the person they tried to make you believe you were. I see the woman who survived impossible things and came through still capable of hope. Still capable of this." "Of what?" "Of letting someone in. Of trusting again. Being brave enough to believe you deserve more than just survival." "I'm afraid," she whispered. "So am I." His admission cracked something open between them. "I've spent my whole life protecting myself from feeling too much. And then you walked into my world, and suddenly all those walls I built feel like a prison instead of protection." Zora stood, closing the small distance between them. She was still shorter even in her shoes. Had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "What if we're both brave together?" His answer was in the way he pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with a reverence that stole her breath. The next day, Zora stood in Junho Park's study doorway, his black card gleaming between her fingers. "I'm just going to the supermarket. I'll be quick." Junho Park looked up from his laptop, his expression immediately shifting to concern. "Take the full security detail." "Junho Park, it's just groceries," Zora said with a soft smile. "I don't need 4 bodyguards to buy vegetables." After everything with Bianca and Derek, it's been weeks. They know better than to come near me now. She walked over and kissed his cheek. "1 guard, that's my compromise." Junho Park studied her face, seeing the independence and confidence she'd gained since coming to live with him. He didn't want to cage her, didn't want her to feel like a prisoner in her own life, but his instincts screamed. Danger. 1 guard, he finally conceded. "Dae-hyun stays close, and you call me if anything feels off. I promise." She squeezed his hand. "I'll be back before you know it." 20 minutes later, Zora was in the produce section of an upscale market. Dae-hyun kept a respectful distance while remaining alert. She was comparing apples when a familiar voice cut through the ambient noise like glass. Well, playing house with Junho Park's credit card." "I see." Zora's stomach dropped. She turned slowly to find Bianca standing 3 feet away, with Derek beside her. Bianca wore expressions of pure malice, though something desperate lurked beneath Bianca's perfectly applied makeup, while Sterling's face was malice mixed with amusement. "Keep walking," Zora said quietly, her voice steady, despite her racing heart. "I don't want trouble." "Of course you don't," Bianca sneered, stepping closer. "You want to keep pretending you're something more than hired help playing dress-up?" Dae-hyun moved forward immediately, positioning himself between Zora and the siblings. "Miss Zora, we should go." "The guard dog speaks," Sterling said with a cold laugh. "Tell me, does Junho Park make you watch her 24/7? Must be exhausting babysitting his latest charity case." I said, "Keep walking," Zora's voice hardened, but Bianca grabbed her arm before she could step back. "Don't you dare walk away from me," Bianca hissed. "You think you're better than me now? You think because Junho Park decided to play savior that you actually matter?" "Let her go," Dae-hyun ordered, reaching for Bianca's wrist. Suddenly, 4 men materialized from different aisles. Sterling's security. They surrounded Dae-hyun, blocking his path to Zora. "I wouldn't," Derek warned. "We just want to talk to her. Remind her of a few things she seems to have forgotten." Zora tried to pull free, but Bianca's nails dug into her arm. Forgotten what? That you're cruel? That you spent months making my life miserable? That you're nothing? Bianca's voice rose, drawing stares from other shoppers. That Junho Park will get bored and throw you away like the trash you are. She shoved Zora hard. Zora stumbled backward, her hip colliding with the sharp corner of a metal display rack. Pain exploded through her side as she crashed to the floor, her hands catching her fall, but her elbows scraped against the tile. Miss Zora. Dae-hyun lunged forward, but Sterling's men grabbed him, 4 against 1. Sterling moved toward Zora as she struggled to her feet, clutching her injured side. You need to remember your place, he said coldly, reaching for her. Dae-hyun fought like a demon, landing a solid punch that sent one man reeling, but the others overwhelmed him. In the chaos, his hand found the emergency beacon on his watch, a direct alert to Junho Park. Get away from me. Zora gasped, backing against the shelving as Sterling advanced. Bianca followed, her face twisted with jealous rage. He's going to realize what we all know, that you're worthless, and when he does, you'll have nothing and no one because you've burned every bridge, thinking you're special. The automatic doors at the front of the store burst open with such force that several people screamed. Junho Park strode through like an avenging angel, 6 of his men flanking him. His eyes swept the scene with terrifying precision. Dae-hyun was restrained, Zora was on the ground bleeding, and Sterling and Bianca were standing over her like predators. The temperature in the store plummeted. Get away from her. Each word was a bullet, cold and precise. Junho Park's men moved with military efficiency, pulling Derek's security off Dae-hyun and creating a protective barrier around the scene. Other shoppers backed away quickly, sensing the danger crackling through the air. Sterling released Zora immediately, stepping back with his hands raised. This is a misunderstanding. Junho Park wasn't listening. He moved straight to Zora, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands were gentle as he assessed her injuries. The scrape on her elbow, the way she held her bruised ribs, and the fear and pain in her eyes. Did they touch you? His voice was barely above a whisper, but everyone heard the lethal promise beneath it. Zora nodded, and something flickered across Junho Park's face that made even his own men tense. He stood slowly, turning to face Sterling and Bianca. The control he was famous for had shattered, replaced by cold, calculating fury. You put your hands on her, Junho Park said, his voice deadly quiet after everything, after I made it clear what would happen. It was just we were talking, Bianca stammered, finally realizing the magnitude of her mistake. There are cameras, Junho Park said, gesturing to the security system witnesses. I can see the bruises forming on her arm from your grip. I can see blood. Junho Park. Sterling tried. No. The word cut like a blade. You had your chance, multiple chances, but you couldn't let it go. You saw her happy, saw her thriving, and you had to try to drag her back down. Junho Park took a step forward, and both Sterling and Bianca visibly flinched. His men moved closer, awaiting orders. The entire store had gone silent, everyone frozen by the tension. I'm going to destroy you, Junho Park said simply. Not quickly, slowly. I'm going to dismantle everything you've built, every connection you have, every shred of power you think you possess, and you'll know exactly why it's happening. Please. Sterling's composure cracked completely. We'll apologize. We'll stay away. Whatever you want. What I want, Junho Park said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried through the store, is for you to understand what it feels like to be powerless, to be at someone else's mercy. To hurt. He turned back to Zora, his expression transforming from rage to concern as he carefully helped her to her feet. She winced, leaning against him. Junho Park, Zora said softly, her hand on his chest. Please, let's just go, after what they did. I know. Her voice was steady despite the pain. "I know you want to make them pay right now, but I just want to leave. Please." The battle raged across his face, every instinct screaming for immediate retribution, warring against Zora's plea. His jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. "Please," she repeated, her eyes searching his. "Take me home." The tension stretched impossibly tight. Junho Park's men were ready to move on his command. Sterling and Bianca looked terrified, finally understanding they'd crossed a line there was no coming back from. Finally, Junho Park's hand came up to cup Zora's face with infinite gentleness, despite the rage still rolling off him in waves. "Okay," he said just to her. "We'll go." He turned back to Sterling and Bianca one final time. "This isn't over. Not even close. What happens next will make you wish you'd never learned her name." Then he carefully lifted Zora into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if she were made of glass. Dae-hyun and the other guards formed a protective circle around them as they walked out, leaving Sterling and Bianca standing in the wreckage of their own making. In the car, Junho Park held Zora close, his hand trembling slightly as he brushed hair from her face. "I should have insisted on more guards. You couldn't have known." "I should have," his voice cracked. "They hurt you and I wasn't there." "But you came," she whispered, resting her head against his shoulder. "You always come." As they drove away, Zora could feel the storm brewing around Junho Park, the careful, methodical fury of a man who'd been pushed past his limits. Junho Park carried Zora into the mansion, his jaw locked tight, his eyes dark with barely contained fury. He settled her on their bed with infinite care, personally tending to each injury, cleaning the scrape on her elbow with gentle precision, and pressing ice to her bruised ribs, his hands trembling slightly despite his careful control. "I'm okay," Zora kept saying. But he wouldn't stop until he was satisfied she'd been properly cared for, until he'd catalogued every mark Derek and Bianca had left on her skin. When he finally stepped back, his phone was already ringing. He ignored it, his attention solely on Zora. But she saw the storm building behind his eyes, the cold, calculated rage of a man who'd reached his limit. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly. Junho Park's expression hardened. "What should I have done the first time they touched you?" He kissed her forehead, then retreated to his office. Through the door, Zora heard his voice. Low, controlled, and absolutely ruthless. He was making call after call. Each conversation was brief and devastating. Junho Park had built his empire on strategy, connections, and an impeccable reputation for being fair but unforgiving to those who crossed him. He'd always operated with restraint, with calculated precision, but Sterling and Bianca had made a fatal miscalculation. They'd hurt the one person who'd made him believe in something beyond power and control. Now he unleashed everything. Within 2 hours, Bianca's leases were terminated. The property owners suddenly added clauses that allowed immediate eviction for code violations. Junho Park moved through his network like a scalpel, cutting away every support Sterling and Bianca had relied on. He didn't threaten. He didn't bluster. He simply made it clear to everyone in his sphere. Anyone who did business with Derek or Bianca was choosing them over him. In this city, no one was foolish enough to make that choice. By midnight, 3 of Bianca's boutiques were closed. Sterling's bank had called in his business loans, demanding immediate payment he couldn't possibly make. Suppliers were canceling contracts. Partners were withdrawing. Their carefully constructed empire was collapsing like a house of cards. Junho Park worked through the night, methodical and merciless. When Zora found him at dawn, still at his desk, surrounded by documents on his phone, he looked exhausted but grimly satisfied. "Have you slept at all?" she asked, setting down a cup of coffee. "No," he pulled her onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her waist and burying his face against her neck. I needed to finish it. Is it finished? Almost. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes still carrying that dangerous edge. By tomorrow, they'll have nothing left. Everything they built, every ounce of power they thought they had, was gone. Zora traced the line of his jaw. You're scaring me a little. I'm scaring myself, he admitted. I've never felt like this. This needs to destroy someone. But every time I close my eyes, I see you on that floor bleeding and scared, and I can't. His voice broke slightly. I can't let that go unpunished. She pressed her forehead to his. I know, and I'm not asking you to. They deserve consequences. I just don't want this to consume you. It won't. He promised that once they understand what they've lost and why, once they've paid for what they did, then it's over. Then we move on. His phone rang again. He glanced at the screen, and a cold smile crossed his face. It's Derek, he answered on speaker. Yes, Junho Park, please. Derek's voice was desperate, stripped of all arrogance. Please, we need to talk. Everything is falling apart. The investors, the properties, the bank. Yes, I know. I arranged it. Silence, then a choke sound. In one day, you destroyed everything we had in one day. You hurt Zora. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? Junho Park's voice was ice. You had every opportunity to learn this lesson. I took her from your house. I warned you at the negotiation. I made it clear what would happen if you came near her again, but you couldn't help yourselves. We made a mistake. Sterling was openly crying now. A terrible mistake. Please, Junho Park, I'm begging you. Tell me what you want. Anything. I'll do anything. Junho Park looked at Zora, and she saw the question in his eyes. She nodded slowly. You want me to stop? Junho Park said. Then you and Bianca come to my home tomorrow at 2 o'clock. You apologize to Zora. A real apology. You acknowledge every way you've hurt her, humiliated her, and dehumanized her. You get on your knees if necessary, and you make her believe you understand what you did. We will, Sterling said immediately. I swear we'll be there. Thank you, Junho Park. Thank you. I'm not doing this for you. Junho Park cut him off. I'm doing it for her because she deserves to hear you admit what you did. She deserves that closure. He hung up without waiting for a response. Zora was quiet for a moment. Processing. You really did destroy everything they had. Yes. No apology in his voice. No regret. That's terrifying power. I know. He cupped her face gently. But I've only ever used it for 2 reasons. To protect what's mine and to ensure people face consequences for their cruelty. Derek and Bianca spent years hurting people weaker than them. They needed to understand what it feels like to be powerless. And tomorrow you get your justice. You get to see them acknowledge what they did. And then he paused. Then you decide if we're done or if I keep going. She studied his face. You'd really let me decide. You're not my possession, Zora. You're my partner. This is your justice to claim, not mine. His thumb brushed across her cheek. Whatever you choose, I'll support you. The next day, at exactly 2 o'clock, Derek and Bianca arrived. They looked nothing like the arrogant people who'd tormented Zora at the supermarket. Derek's expensive suit was wrinkled, his face haggard. Bianca's designer dress hung on her frame, her makeup unable to hide the exhaustion and fear in her eyes. Junho Park's men escorted them to the sitting room, where Zora waited. Junho Park was standing protectively beside her chair. The siblings looked small and diminished, standing in the grand room that showcased everything they'd lost. For a long moment no one spoke. Well, Junho Park's voice was sharp. You asked for this meeting. Make it worth her time. Sterling stepped forward first, and to Zora's shock, he dropped to one knee. Zora, his voice broke. I'm so sorry for everything. For how I treated you when you worked in my home. For standing by while my staff abused you. For letting Bianca humiliate you. For putting my hands on you yesterday. Tears streamed down his face. You didn't deserve any of it. You were just trying to survive. And I made your life hell because I could. Because I never saw you as a person who mattered. Bianca stood frozen, pride and shame warring across her face. Sterling looked back at her. Bianca. After a long moment, Bianca lowered herself to her knees beside her brother, though every movement screamed reluctance. She looked at Zora, and something in her expression cracked. I was jealous, Bianca whispered. From the first moment Junho Park looked at you, I saw something in his eyes he'd never given me. And I hated you for it. I wanted to destroy you because if I couldn't have his attention, I didn't want anyone else to have it. She wiped tears away angrily. But that doesn't excuse what I did, how I treated you, or the things I said. You didn't deserve any of it. The apology hung in the air. Zora sat very still, processing words she'd never imagined hearing from these two people. You made me feel like I was nothing, Zora said finally, her voice steady but emotional. Every single day, you found new ways to remind me that I didn't matter, that I was less than human. Do you understand what that does to a person? Yes, Derek said, his voice raw. I understand now. I'm so ashamed. I thought I was powerful, Bianca added, her composure finally breaking completely. But real power isn't making others feel small. You were stronger than me every day. You survived my cruelty with your dignity and tact. I see that now. Zora stood slowly and walked toward them. They looked up at her, waiting for judgment. I'm not going to say I forgive you, Zora said quietly. I'm not there yet, and I may never be. What you did left scars that won't disappear because you apologized. She took a breath, feeling Junho Park's presence behind her, supporting her. But I accept your apology. I hear that you understand what you did was wrong. And I won't ask Junho Park to destroy you completely. Relief flooded both their faces. But if you ever come near me again with anything other than respect, there won't be a second chance. And I want you to prove this apology is real. Volunteer. Work with organizations that help domestic workers. Public acknowledgement of how you've treated service staff. Genuine change in how you conduct your business if you rebuild them. Derek nodded vigorously. We will. I promise. Zora looked at Junho Park, who squeezed her hand but remained silent. This was her moment, her decision. You can go now, Zora said. Sterling and Bianca scrambled to their feet and left quickly, escorted out by Junho Park security. When the door closed, Junho Park pulled Zora into his arms. How do you feel? Free, she said, surprised by the truth of it. I thought I'd feel triumphant or vindicated, but mostly I just feel free, like I finally closed a chapter I've been stuck in. You are magnificent, he murmured. Strong, fair, merciful, watching you claim your justice. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes intense. I've never been more in awe of you, Zora smiled, feeling peace settle in her chest. Thank you for giving me the choice, for letting me decide how this ended. Always, he promised, kissing her softly. You're not someone I protect from the world, Zora. You're someone I protect while you face the world. There's a difference. And Sterling and Bianca, I'll ease the pressure gradually. If they honor their commitments to you, they can rebuild, but they'll never forget what it cost them to hurt you. As evening fell, they sat in the garden together. Zora curled against Junho Park's side, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold. "What happens now?" she asked. Now Junho Park pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now we live our lives. We build our future. We leave Derek and Bianca in the past, where they belong." He tilted her face up to his. "Now I spend every day showing you that you were nothing. You're everything. Everything." She teased gently. "Everything." He confirmed. "My partner, my equal. The woman who made me believe in something beyond power and control. You made me believe in us, Zora, in building instead of destroying, in being better. You were always capable of better," she said softly. "I just helped you see it. Then let me spend the rest of my life proving you right." 3 months into the incident, Junho Park asked Zora to meet him on the mansion's rooftop. She'd been up there before. It was a beautiful space transformed into a garden with flowering plants and comfortable seating, offering panoramic views of the city. But tonight it was different. Strings of lights glowed warmly overhead, and candles flickered on every surface, creating an intimate oasis above the world. "What's all this?" she asked, but her heart already knew. Junho Park stood in the center of the space, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked nervous. "When I first saw you in Sterling's household, you were surrounded by people who couldn't see your worth. I told myself I chose you to give you justice, to recognize what they refused to see. But the truth is, you chose me too. You saw past the walls I'd built, past the cold exterior, to the man underneath who was just lonely and broken and desperate to be seen." He took her hands, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "You made me want to be better. You taught me that strength isn't the same as hardness. That vulnerability isn't a weakness. That love is the bravest thing we can choose. Together, we're more than we could ever be alone. And I want that. I want us for the rest of my life." He knelt, and Zora's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. The ring inside was stunning, a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds, unique and perfect. "Zora, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, then found her voice. "Yes. Yes. 1,000 times. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when he stood, she threw her arms around him, laughing and crying simultaneously. "You gave me a life worth living," she whispered. "How could I say anything but yes?" They set the date for 3 months later, wanting something intimate rather than the society spectacle people expected. The wedding took place in the mansion's garden on a perfect autumn afternoon, surrounded by only their closest friends and the staff who'd become family. Mrs. K cried through the entire ceremony. Junho Park's business partners looked on with barely concealed shock at seeing their ruthless colleague transformed by love. But none of it mattered to Zora as she walked down the rose-petal-strewn aisle toward the man who'd saved her by letting her save him in return. Late in the evening, as they slow danced to music that drifted through the garden, Zora looked up at her husband and smiled. "What are you thinking?" Junho Park asked, his hand warm on her waist. "That we saved each other. We did. That we're going to have an incredible life together. We are." He pulled her closer. "Always and forever, remember?" "Always and forever," she echoed. Two people who'd been denied by the world, who'd found in each other not just love but home, danced in their garden under the stars. They'd walked through fire to find each other, survived darkness to reach the light, and now they faced a future limited only by their courage to keep choosing each other every single day. It was enough. It was everything. It was theirs.